Awesome. Thank you, everyone, for coming to this talk. We're sorry we're pausing your happy hour, so thank you. If you're already starting happy hour right now, please share with your partners next to you, or at least pass something up. We really appreciate it. My name is Ryan St. Germain. I'm a principal consultant with, with a large security company. Previously, I was a manager of information security at a small company here in Maryland. So our talk today is going to be based on our experience in both larger organization and a smaller org. The larger org we work for works with Fortune 500 companies doing proactive security assessments and tabletop. So we're going to use that experience and hopefully pass on some knowledge today. I'm going to pass this on to Clarissa really quick.
Hi, everyone. I'm Clarissa Bury. I am a consultant on the same team as Ryan. I'm doing strategic advisory. So that's really proactive services, like you said, for those big clients. And before this, I was a security engineer doing all that kind of defensive blue team work for a small company here in Maryland. And I was also the IT manager for a small nonprofit in Washington, D.C. So in this talk, we're really going to, like he said, go through and blend those two worlds together. So what the companies that we're working with have ton of resources. They'll have in-house SOCs and retainers with specialists on call. But smaller companies really don't have those kinds of resources, and they have to be a lot more purposeful and precise with how they allocate both their people's time and the funding that they have. So really, what is proactive security? Put it simply, it's everything that you're doing before an attack happens, everything you're doing to prepare and defend, right? But it's really about preemptively finding and addressing any weaknesses and fixing your processes and improving upon them so that you're ready if and when an attack does come. And this is really important because it makes organizations more resilient, right? So you're trying to prevent attacks and better prepare. We're also going to be talking a little bit about what resources are available to you that fit in with a smaller organization's priorities. And we're going to go through a couple tools you can use, how to go through and think about tabletops, and how to get some executive buy-in on those. I'm going to hand it back to Ryan. We're going to go through some documentation.
Awesome. So I know documentation is pretty boring, but as we do these larger assessments with these larger companies, one of the biggest issues that tends to come up is that lack of documentation, and specifically runbooks and playbooks. And as I'm sure there are a lot of people here who work security for smaller businesses. Runbooks and playbooks are relatively more important because you're having to share roles, right? You're having to share hats within that organization. So let's say Tom is out of town, maybe Timmy in IT then has to take over and run a firewall or something else, right? Some other security control that he's not normally responsible for. So one of the first most important things is that it's a common and repeatable process. So things that you're doing on a regular basis. So let's say if it's a phishing attack as an example, you're going in, logging into the firewall, right? You're putting maybe IP addresses in to block it, or you're logging into Microsoft 365 to block a sender address, right? These are repeatable processes that most likely aren't going to change and potentially could be automated. But one of the issues we found is that they're not being created, and two, they're not actually being updated, right? So you can have a playbook and a runbook, but it's not as good unless you're actually keeping it up to date. Because let's say you have a Palo Alto firewall, and the next thing you know, you're upgrading to a checkpoint or something like that. Well, that process is going to change. So one of the last items is it sort of essentially paves the way to automation, right? So we talk about SOAR all the time. Well, when you purchase a SOAR, what are you going to do with it? Well, the whole point is that it's going to automate those playbooks and runbooks. So if you can document those first, then you have an easier path forward to moving into that SOAR product. And that can especially be more important for small businesses who don't have a large security organization. And there are a lot of free open source resources out there that can help get started. And so this is just a very basic example, obviously, of a playbook and runbook process. It's pretty surprising how many people don't actually understand what this looks like, even at Fortune 500 companies. So just want to give a high-level overview, phishing playbook, and then it descends right down into your actual runbooks. So that's where those actual processes are going to occur. So with runbooks and playbooks, right, the important part is that you actually have the security controls in place to leverage those. And so this is that cybersecurity, control landscape out there that we all see. And as a small business, like, holy crap, where the hell do I start, right? And especially with small businesses, we don't have the money. So what's important? Where do I put my priorities? And where do I go from here? Whoops. So everyone knows security in depth, right? Security onion, right? This is what we're taught basic level. But the problem is it's not being implemented. And it's even more important for us small businesses because we don't have the funding to purchase all these other security products. So we need to identify the key areas that we're going to invest, and that could be purchasing a product or it could just be leveraging free open source tools, right? So if you came to me right now and you told me to start a security program, where would I invest that? It would be in a SIM, right? Because then you can build around that. And I'm not saying you have to buy a SIM. There are free open source products, but the first part would probably be a SIM, and then you can build around that with your prevention controls, right? You're getting the data in, and you need to know what you're actually going to protect within your organization. The third one, and it's not as sexy as the other items, right? Configuration management. We're baselining and looking for hardening of images. So we're trying to harden the products and the assets that we're managing to prevent them from being compromised, obviously, right? And a lot of times this is free. I mean, you look at CIS, you look at STIGs, you can baseline your asset during the deployment phase to disable, obviously, services that you're not looking to actually implement or leverage, right? Like if you're deploying a non-web server, you're not going to enable IIS. So you need to ensure that it's disabled. Or you need to make sure that PowerShell, script block logging is on. Like these basic items. So configuration management is one of the third more important items that we found. Fourth and final one is ticketing and case management. We have a lot of these products, like even a SIM, right? They're generating alerts. If there's an incident, alerts fire, right? But where do they go? And the majority of the time, they're going to a single mailbox or they're going to a distribution list. And a lot of times, that's like a single point of failure. So you want an area to actually track and manage these alerts in, right? So that you can, obviously for auditing ability, but also for tracking of your TTPs and your IOCs. And so then you can leverage that, and then that builds upon your automation. And we'll talk about a little bit of a security product and help you with the automation of that. So, quote unquote free solutions, right? We go on GitHub, we have all these options out there, but the problem is these aren't really free. They're free to take, right? But there's a management cost to all of these. So when we're looking at the landscape of free solutions, we need to keep that in mind. And there are certain considerations that we need to take into account before actually leveraging and then implementing that within our environment. And the first one is it actively supported? So a lot of times we'll go into GitHub, we'll find a project, right? And well, it hasn't been updated in 2 years, and issues are piling up. We don't see any replies from the contributor. I mean, it's open source. We sort of expect that at the end of the day sometimes, right? But that's a huge item to look for because you don't want to implement something that you're then not going to have support for. Especially if you buy like a product like RSA for secure ID, right? You're getting support with that product. So with these open source ones, you're the support, which sort of then goes into cost of administration. So you need to understand what you're implementing because then it becomes potential tech debt. You need to understand if the people that are going to be managing this are going to be able to actually manage this if they have the capability, especially with new security solutions nowadays, which are appliance-based, right? And are leveraging a lot of containerization. So if you don't understand containers and all of a sudden your open source, let's say Suricata goes down, what's your support options there? You can reach out to the community, obviously, but you're not reaching out to that premium support that you normally would with a commercial product. The third one being security updates. Like I mentioned, a lot of these products are virtual appliances. So they're built on Linux distributions. And I've seen a lot of times where we download these products or these free solutions, and they're running on an out-of-date, let's say, Ubuntu distribution that hasn't been supported in 1 or 2 years. So when we're looking for free solutions, we need to identify what's actually being run in the background. It's sort of like when we're looking for like an SBOM or something like that for a commercial solution, we need to identify what's going on in the background so that we can continue to support that. And the fourth and final one is integrations with existing platforms, right? You want to get a platform or security solution that's going to integrate with other items within your environment. Because then, you're not going to go out and have to replace additional items just because you brought this one new security solution in. And that's not just limited to a free solution, right? I mean, if we're going out to buy a Palo Alto product, we want to ensure that it's going to work with our other products as well. So one of the projects that I love, and I mentioned, case management earlier, is the Hive project. Obviously, you can collect items in there with cases management. It integrates with a lot of different products, especially with its native API. But what's awesome, and I want to point on here, is that the metrics collection. We talk about metrics and our eyes roll a little bit, but one of the items that you should identify is your log source collection and take metrics on where those logs that are actionable actually come from. Because a lot of times, if you're working with a Splunk license, right, it's based on volume. So if you're just ingesting data for no reason, if it's not actually helping you and it's not actionable, what are you sort of paying for, right? So you need to be able to identify and track what log sources are helping you at the end of the day. I'm sure you all have seen the Hive project, but I'll give you the next little screenshot here. Second is email security. I mean, I'm sure we have security administrators here all the time, right? We're responding to people who decided to click on something that was obviously a phish. But at the end of the day, it's going to continue to happen. So one of the projects that I wish was around when I was still a security engineer was the Sublime Security project. I don't know how many people here who have worked with it, but it's pretty damn awesome. One of the problems right now that we have with our current security solutions, let's say Microsoft 365, Proofpoint, you name it, you don't really have any insight into what it's basing its decisions on, right? It's not like Snort where you can go in and edit a rule. It's pretty much its own proprietary decision-making product. And at the end of the day, normally all we can do is add an email address or an IP address that we want to block, right? That's pretty much all the control we have. Maybe you can add attachments, stuff like that. But we need a way to build rules out based on the properties of an email, sort of like an IDS rule or, let's say, a SIM rule, right? And that's where the message query language of Sublime Security comes in. You can write a rule based on an actual email itself. And I have a screenshot so you can see that, but I highly recommend you guys check it out. One of the biggest advantages of this platform is that it natively integrates into email solutions. So you don't have to go to your IT engineer and say, hey, I need to set up a new MTA, right? You can integrate natively with Microsoft 365, IMAP, or even Google Workspaces if you want. And so this is just a little screenshot. On the left, you have the email, and then on the right, you have the rule. And so you can see that the attachments, headers, all of this breaks down, and this is essentially just an email that you can ingest into the system and then write rules based on that. So this is open source. You guys can check it out. I'll leave a link within the slides. So we have a lot of options out there, right, in terms of security controls, free platform, stuff like that. But at the end of the day, if you say, okay, well, I want to integrate Zeek, I want to integrate Suricata, you name it, you've already got 2 or 3 things that you're going to need to maintain. And that's where these security platforms come in. It's one platform, essentially, to manage them all, to rule them all, right? Everything's in one. You update the platform itself. It updates the sub-components, so like Suricata and you name it. So Security Onion, Wazoo are great places to start if you want an all-in-one solution that has like a SIM, IDS, file integrity monitoring, things like that. I'm going to pass it on to Clarissa, and she's going to talk about tabletop exercises.
All right. So we covered a bunch of the more technical side of things, the documentation, the tooling, but now we're going to get into a little bit more of the people side of proactive security. So this is really what I do every single day. I make tabletop exercises for our clients. At its basis form, a tabletop is really just creating a scenario of an attack, gathering the people that would be involved in responding to that attack, and then playing through how you would respond to it as a team. And these can be as big as or as small as you want. You could get a few people from the technical team, do something very specific. How do we recover from backups if we needed to for this one system, things like that. Or you can make it a cross-team exercise, which can actually be really helpful bringing in other stakeholders into the cybersecurity or incident response process. So, you can think about bringing in executives or legal or communications, whatever other teams you might have in your organization that could benefit. When you're thinking about tabletops, there's not really enough time in this talk to go through the actual design process in the specifics, but some ways to think about it. You want to think about the scope first. So what processes are you trying to test? What is the company most at risk for? Think like a threat actor. What would they look for in your organization? What would be valuable to them? And how would they go and get it? And then you can kind of build your scenario backwards from there. Thinking about really those end results that you're looking for, those processes you're trying to test. If you're looking to test your technical team's abilities to respond, you don't really necessarily need to spend as much time on some of the communication side and vice versa. You also really want to think about your audience, so their level of technical expertise. If you're bringing in some of those other stakeholders from other teams, some of your executives maybe who don't have as much of a technical background, you want to make sure that you're formatting your scenario to fit with the information that they would need in an actual incident and the role that they would play. So build those facilitation questions and the scenario around that information. You also really want to be conscious of tone. So in the tabletops that I do, people often get very nervous. I've had people, on the first slide of our tabletops, the director of IT security says, my palms are already sweaty, I'm a little nervous already. So you want to make sure that you're making it very clear throughout the process, both in the build-up and at the beginning of the scenario, that this is a learning exercise. It's not an exam. It's not an assessment. The goal isn't to answer every question perfectly and be completely right. The goal is, as a team, to work through your processes, learn from it, practice it, and also find areas to improve as well. I've included a couple resources here. You can Google these, just those keywords, and you'll find it. It's also linked, and we're going to post these slides. But one thing to really consider with the resources that are out there for free about designing tabletops is they're often aimed at bigger organizations that have a lot of specialization in their roles. And so they're going to talk a lot about having a designated incident commander and having a designated person to do each different role. And that might not be the case for smaller organizations where those roles really blend together. So another thing that you want to really think about is capturing that institutional knowledge that you might have. So everyone knows that there's someone at your organization who's been there 25 years, who knows every single thing about every server, but that knowledge doesn't necessarily get transferred to other people. So through a tabletop exercise, it's a really great opportunity to cross-train your employees and capture that information in a concrete way. Now, you might be thinking, all this stuff that we talked about is so great, but how do I actually get my leadership to do it? Now, you want to really quantify that risk. Leadership loves a cost analysis. So explain the financial impacts of a cyber incident. Really just kind of talk about that when you're pitching some of these ideas. How will these proactive measures really help you defend against this? Talk about why it's important to practice responding to an incident. Or you could run a smaller incident that you might not need their authorization for, and then kind of show the results of that and say, here's what we learned. I'd like to do this on a bigger scale across the company and bring in some other teams. It can also really help to get stakeholders from other sides of the organization involved. An easy way to do this is looking at compliance requirements. So you can get legal or HR on your team if you map the ways that these different proactive measures will correlate to the compliance frameworks that you need to comply with, or even how these proactive measures would make you look good to cyber insurance. A lot of cyber insurance is asked, do you do tabletop exercises? Do you have these different tools? Do you have someone who can practice, who knows how to do the disaster recovery processes that you have in place? And then obviously showing instead of telling. So tabletop exercises, yet again, are a great way to do this, but also showing them how these different tools work, what is useful about them, and illustrating also how cyber incidents progress. A lot of executives might not be familiar with this, and showing them about what it is you're doing as a responder can be really helpful. I had a tabletop actually where in the middle of the tabletop, it was a management level, and they had one technical security, like incident response person there. And in the middle of the tabletop, they realized they were asking him to do 4 different things at once. And so they wrote down and authorized him to get 3 new people for his security team right in the tabletop. All right, so that is actually all we have for today. You can find us if you have more questions at the happy hour right after this or on Twitter. You can also find our slides posted on GitHub at this address. Thank you.